Hi everybody, this is Jim. Welcome to round 10 coverage of the Zurich 1953 Candidates Tournament. The game I wanted to look at from round 10 was this game between Miguel Najdorf and Gideon Stahlberg. So Stahlberg with the black pieces, I've talked about him before. He was the former Swedish champion and many-time Nordic champion. Najdorf, of course, is well known for the Najdorf variation of the Sicilian defense, a famous player and opening theoretician. He was actually born Moise Mendel Najdorf in Poland, and born in 1910. He was throughout the 30s. He represented Poland in several Olympiads, became a strong player. And in 1939, he was playing at the 8th Olympiad in Argentina when World War II started. And of course, World War II started with Germany invading Poland, so it wasn't clear if he had any place to go back to. In any case, he stayed in Buenos Aires, became known as Miguel Najdorf, and he became a citizen, lived the rest of his life there, wrote a chess column for the local newspaper, and in general just integrated himself into Argentinian life and represented Argentina from that point forward. His probably strongest years were in the late 40s. It was a bit unfortunate. In 1948, there was a tournament to choose a world champion following the death of Alexander Alekhine, and he was not invited to that tournament. So that was maybe one of his peak opportunities to become a world champion, which he never quite achieved. But he is playing in this tournament and also playing for a shot at getting to go against the current world champion, Mikhail Botvinnik. So that's where things stand. In this game, I selected it primarily for the endgame. So I'm going to go through the opening pretty quickly, but I thought the endgame was really instructive, and I'll point out what I think is interesting about it when we get there. But let's just go through the opening quickly. d4, knight f6, c4, e6. You might think after knight c3 we're going to get a Nimzo Indian, but Stahlberg is just going into a queen's gambit declined by other moves. So we get a main line of the queen's gambit declined here with the bishop g5 and then e3, getting the bishop out first, pinning the knight and then playing e3. Of course, black is breaking the pin. Knight bd7, extra defense for the knight. Knight f3, castles. Wrong piece there, castles. Rook c1. So these are all pretty much standard moves. c6, supporting the center there, building up the strong triangle. And then a very typical move you see in many queen's gambits. Black waits until white moves the bishop and then takes this pawn and forces the bishop to move twice, so gaining a little tempo there. Very characteristic. Now knight d5 is a way of getting rid of some of the pressure on black's position, trading off some pieces. Bishop takes, queen takes, and knight e4. So Bronstein comments at this point in the book that this position was reached many times in the World Championship match between Alekhine and Capablanca, and that Alekhine, this was his invention, this knight e4 move, and that the game would typically continue with something like knight to f6, knight drops back to g3, and then queen here, check, and this would lead to some wholesale exchanges. White really has nothing better than queen d2. And so black sort of comfortably draws at this point. But if we back up, looking at this with a chess engine, after knight f6, it looks like white gets a good game by just taking here. And and whether black takes back with the bishop or with the queen or the knight, it looks like white has a decent game here. So if you ever see this is perhaps why this line is not played so much anymore. I guess the problem for black in this position is he's got a bishop which is stuck behind the pawns, and it's going to have a hard time developing, and looks like white has a lot of central influence on these two squares, which will prevent black from breaking with the pawns and gaining space. So it looks like this is kind of a joyless position for black to play. In any case, Gideon had a different idea, and not a bad idea. He strikes out with e4. And at first you think, well, maybe this is a pawn sacrifice. So if you grab the pawn here, you can try this. Knight takes e5. The way the pawn sack works is you grab the pawn here, but you don't take back immediately, which would bring the queen forward. Instead, you grab the knight here. Pawn takes, and then queen takes. But black can take the knight here then. And in this position, black has enough compensation for the pawn. Basically, he sacked a pawn, but white's queen side is somewhat wrecked, king side is somewhat wrecked, and it looks like black has a good bishop in this structure. He's got open lines and no problems. And so there's still a slight edge for white, but not a full pawn advantage. So there's a way for white. White's not attracted to this position because it looks like black can hold it. So what Najdorf did in this position is he just castled. And so black chooses to take the pawn here. And taking back with the queen. The knight went to b6. Yeah, I'm not going to go over every move here. Just going to get to the critical positions. Bishop to g4. So black has cleared out some pawns in the center. He's given up the center, but he's activated his pieces. And this is pretty much okay. And black decides to trade here. And right here maybe is a bit of an inaccurate move. Black has got a perfectly good position and doesn't really need to trade queens. It's just, it appears that Stahlberg was using these trades as a way to get to a drawn endgame. And he nearly succeeds. So queen takes, knight takes. This is all good. Or about even, I should say. If assuming black is heading for a draw, he's doing fine so far. But white is activating his pieces. One of the reasons why this queen trade was not so great for black was that he has no great way to take advantage of these doubled pawns over here with the queens off. So white has no trouble defending this position. But black gets to activate his pieces. Rook a to d8, rook f to d1, setting up some central tension. Neither side really wants to trade here, at least at this point, because whoever trades is going to lose control of the d file. If white takes, then black will take back with a rook, and conversely, if black takes and white takes back with the rook. But right here, probably knight to d5. One of these knights to d5 is a good move. Instead, Stahlberg plays the move knight c8, so just a very passive move, moving his pieces back but trying to set up a defensive position. And now Najdorf starts heading for the endgame. We're not quite in the endgame yet, so let's go forward a couple moves. King f1, rook to e8, king e2, king f8. And now he decides to go for the endgame with the rook exchange. Rook takes, rook takes. And notice that even though black has got the file, it's not as important anymore because the king and the pawn are guarding all of these entry squares. In fact, the bishop and the knight include these squares. So all these squares are under white's control, and so white is not afraid to give up the d file at this point. So there's an interesting rule. You might wonder why I call this the endgame right here, and that's called the rule of 14. So that rule goes, if there's 14 points or more of force, then it's not the endgame. If it's less than 14, then it is the endgame. This is just a rule of thumb, obviously, but 14 points, if you think about it, is the value of a queen plus a rook. So if one side has a queen and a rook, then it's really not safe for your king to come out and join the play. But if you go down to 13 points, you can get 13 points by, say, 2 rooks and a piece. Your king can start to contribute to the game at that point. And so that sort of marks the boundary of the end game. In this case, there's 11 points, right? It's 5 for the rook and 6 for the minor pieces, so 11 points. So we have transitioned into the end game here. And so watch how white plays from this point forward. First of all, he brings his rook to the g file, which is a half-open file, but it's uncontested by the rook, so this rook has scope and activity. White or black. Black should probably just play pawn to g6, kicking this knight away from its good post and setting up a defensive barrier against the rook. but instead black chooses to play knight e8. So a couple of maybe less than perfect moves from black, but still this is a very resilient position, and it's quite even. So the first thing is he activates his rook. He continues to activate his rook. That's the phase we're at here. He's trying to maximize the activity of all his pieces. So he lifts it up to the 4th rank. This knight goes to e7, offering another trade. He decides to accept it, which brings the king forward. And then rook e4 drives the king back. So you don't want your opponent's king to get active if you can help it. And then he starts probing with the rook. Rook to a4. Trying to create some weaknesses. Rook to f4 and f6. So this point, maybe black starts to slide downhill. I would say up until this point, and the engine agrees, it's all still pretty even. White looks good. He's got more active pieces, but black can still hold this position. But he should probably play knight to f6 as a way to shield the f-pawn. But he has to do something. There is the bishop and the rook are triangulating on the f-pawn, and he chose to play f6. So now the rook switches over to another target, h6. So he's forced all these pawn moves, and then he moves his rook forward to h5, preventing this rook from advancing, and also preventing this pawn from advancing. Also prevents this pawn from advancing because that would leave this guy undefended. So he's trying to remove moves from white's position, trying to take all the moves away from black. I mean. Okay, so black starts maneuvering his knight. Perhaps he didn't like the knight f6 idea because he had other plans for that knight. Starts maneuvering it around. White pushes on with f4. And king comes up to e7. And now rook to c5, putting pressure on this pawn and similarly preventing the b pawn from advancing. Rook to d6. And rook drops back to c1. So at this point, actually this move was a bit of a mistake. Right here, the best move is f5, just continuing to lock down on black's position. Okay, but he dropped his rook back, and now right here, black could play f5. That's why this move was a bit of a mistake. But black didn't play that. Anyway, the move f5 would just give a little more space for black's pieces and prevent the clamp that's coming. Instead, black played the move b6. He was trying to get his queenside majority rolling, which is a good strategy in general. He just needed to secure his kingside a bit first before pushing on. But with these pawns, with this pawn protected by the rook, he was able to move the b pawn forward, and now maybe he can push the c pawn forward next. And that's also why the rook dropped back to c1. It was about to get kicked. Okay, but f5 in any case would have been better. But he gets to play it here because b6 was played. And now c5 is played, so black is getting his pawns moving forward. And now f4. This is taking away squares from black's pieces, so he can no longer put a rook on this e5 square. Okay, rook to c6 and a4, grabbing more space on the queenside, slowing down these pawn pushes, and b5 anyway. And now bishop to c2, knight to e8, and bishop to e4, going after the rook. It's very interesting. The computer has a suggestion here that actually e4 is the strongest way to play it. Already setting up some ideas of bringing the king forward and pushing through in the center, trying to create a pawn this way. But bishop to e4 was played instead. The rook has to move. And of course, white is not afraid of black taking the pawn over here. These a pawns will be weak, and he can easily round it up with his rook. So black wants to keep these pawns together. He's not tempted to take over there as well. So this tension is going to remain in the position. Bishop to d5 was played, getting the bishop to a more active square. Now c4 and e4. Now with the idea of pushing these pawns through the center. Knight to d6 was played here. It might be a little more accurate to play the king to d6. It looks like the king can do a better job of going after these pawns. But knight d6 puts some pressure on white's position here, ties the bishop up to defense the pawn. But, okay, white at this point chooses to exchange, get rid of the tension over here, and move his king forward. So the king can support these pawns, free up the bishop to move. And now, let's see, we're getting to this point. Rook a7 was played here. Yeah, this is an interesting move. Right now was the time when black could have gone for perhaps a drawn position. So this is kind of instructive. He could play b4. I'll explain why I say perhaps in a minute. And now white doesn't have a whole lot to do. Say plays rook c2, b3. This is the idea, is to push that pawn forward. And this king goes to a position here, and then go over to rook a7. This is the computer line. And now black has got some activity. The other way of playing it is to push on with c3. And, of course, this is a pawn sack, so it might be a little bit dangerous. Because the king can come over here and grab the pawn. But if the knight just defends this way, okay, the bishop has to chase the knight away, and now the rook can just defend the knight. So we get this situation with an extra pawn. White has an extra pawn. So this is another important point I wanted to make in this video. There are 4 pawns against 3, and they're all on one side of the board. And the general rule is that 4 pawns against 3 is a draw with correct play. But this is the kind of position you can still play on for quite a long time, and it can be very tricky to defend. So black might have tried to go for this position and tried to hold this draw, but this can be a very difficult draw to play. And in fact, I'm not entirely sure this is a draw. I don't know if this exact position is a draw or not. There's too many pieces here. You can't look it up in a table base, for example. You just have to play it out. And there's no simple rule other than the general rule that 4 pawns against 3, all on one side with no other unusual factors, is generally a draw. And of course, it's important that black have active pieces. His king needs to be near the pawns, and his rook needs to be active. But he has the move rook b2 here, and trying to harass some of white's pawns from behind. So this might be a draw, and it might have been a way for black to hold the game. Anyway, black went rook a7 right away. And at this point, white's advantage is starting to increase noticeably. So he first goes here with this rook to g1, hitting the g-pawn. The king drops back. And then he moves his king forward. So once again, these are the rules. You get all your pieces active. You get your king active, especially because that's the one you tend to forget about. And central squares are important. Notice how the king here freezes these black pawns from going forward. If ever this b pawn is pushed, then the bishop can grab the c pawn. So excellent positions for white's pieces here. Rook to c7 was played here. Rook to c1, keeping this pawn from going forward. And now knight to b7. So this move actually is the losing move. Now, up until this point, white had a significant advantage, but it's not clear it's entirely winning. But after knight b7, this is just winning here. And I guess I would like you to guess the move at this point. It's white's turn to move. Keep in mind the things I was talking about with active pieces. It's not like there's some super tactic here or anything. It's just and there's just one move that's better than all the other moves in terms of piece activity. Okay, pause the video if you want time to think about it. I am going to give the answer away. It's a simple move. It's just rook a1. But now the rook is threatening to come to the back rank, and the problem is there's no good way to stop it. Notice the rook here is momentarily tied up defending the knight, so the rook can't drop back. And the knight If the knight drops back to the back rank, then the rook comes here anyway and pins the knight. So there's really no good way to stop it. So knight c5 was played, and the rook does go to the back rank. Rook a1, king comes forward. And now the next move, once again, it's in both of these situations, there's only a single move that really keeps the advantage for white. In the previous one, it was rook a1. Okay, now there's another move for white in this position. And if you want to pause the video and think about it. Okay, I'm going to give the answer away. The one move in this position that keeps the edge for white is the move e5. You've got to strike when everything is set up at its optimum position. You know, the rook is down here controlling all of these squares and also ready to attack from the side. The bishop is in an excellent centralized position. The king is here influencing all these squares. Now it's time to push forward with your pawns. Of course, you have to calculate all the consequences of this, but black does not want to just take the pawn and give white this pair of this pawn duo of the e pawn and f pawn side by side, just sort of dominating this side of the board. He plays knight b3, which is the best move, trying to check the king away and maybe grab this pawn at a more opportune time. King goes to c3. He plays knight c1 here. He could try. There is a complicated line with rook c5. Might be a bit of a stronger defense here. Let's take a look at that briefly. Rook c5, hitting the loose bishop. Black can throw in this check first. King goes to d8. If it tries to grab, well, it can't really save the pawn, you'll see. But it's white doesn't have time to grab that pawn because his bishop is hanging. So he plays bishop e6, then the exchange. And instead of grabbing back, white plays rook d7, check. King goes over here to e8, and then rook takes g7. Knight d4, attacking the bishop and the pawn. Bishop d7 check. Cancel that. Bishop d7 check, right. King goes to f8 and f6. And white's got a winning position here. It still takes a little bit of care because of these pieces can get in and cause trouble. But there's just too many threats here to defend against all of them. So anyway, it's just a tremendous position for white. It's going to manage to force this pawn through, and black will have to sacrifice a piece to stop it. So that was the sort of the toughest defense for black, counterattacking with rook c5. Black played knight c1 instead. Still winning for white. I just wanted to show that other line. Now rook to g8, going after this pawn, which the king cannot get over and defend. So this is where white's control of all these squares, the space that white controls, really becomes important. So he can't really defend this. He tries knight e2 check. King goes to d2, attacking the knight. Knight takes f4. And rook takes g7 with check. King goes to d8. And then okay, one more precise move here. There's actually two moves that are winning, but there's one move is clearly the best. So see if you can find the best move in this position. Okay, pause the video if you want some time to think about it. First, I'll tell you the second best move, sort of the obvious one. If you just take this rook, you still have a winning advantage because king takes, and e takes f6, and these pawns over here, well, the king in this line can gain a tempo on the bishop, but he can't actually take the bishop because of this threat of queening. And this is a long endgame that white should eventually win with the bishop and these two passed pawns here, but it will take some playing. So there's a faster way to end this. So if you guessed rook takes c7 and you want time to think about it again, see if you can find the absolute best move here. Okay, I'm going to give the answer away now. It is e takes f6, defending, taking a pawn and defending the rook. And now if rook takes, there's just no stopping the pawn from queening. So he tried rook to d7, going after the bishop, which is pinned. So it pins the bishop can't move. Now the exchange. And one last precise move here from white. See if you can guess this one. And after this, black resigns. Okay, pause the video if you want time to think about it. This one is a very cute tactic. So if you're tactically sharp, you always always have to be aware of tactics in the endgame. Anyway, the move is bishop to c6 check. Really nice idea. So notice that the bishop is controlling this square, the pawns are controlling these squares, so the king cannot run over here to any of these squares and stop this guy from queening. So he just resigned at this point. If he takes the bishop, then white pushes on with the pawn, and not only is the king too far away, but also the knight can't get to any of the squares that stop the pawn from queening because of the doubled f-pawn. So this backwards doubled f-pawn comes in very handy. And so if we back up a few moves, black saw that coming, and after bishop to c6 check, black resigned. So pretty nice example of endgame technique. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Just to wrap up the round 10 coverage, Petrosian had another win at the end of round 10, defeating Max Hervé in a similar game to what I showed you in round 9, where he didn't seem to do a whole lot, and then his opponent made a mistake, and then he just clamped down on him and didn't let up for a minute. Reshevsky and Smyslov played each other in this round, but the game ended rather quickly in a draw. So their standings are the same. It's Reshevsky at 7 points in the lead, and Smyslov at 6.5 points in second place. And tied in third place, we have Najdorf with 5.5 after this win, and Max Hervé at 5.5 points still at 5.5 points after his loss to Petrosian. So that's it for round 10. Stay tuned for next round coverage. I will see you again soon. Bye.